I woke up Tuesday morning to find my backyard had shrunk overnight, and standing at what used to be my fence line was a woman in a purple cardigan holding a clipboard like it was a holy text. My name is Ethan Edwards, and I had lived in the Riverside Meadows subdivision in Charlotte, North Carolina for 3 peaceful years. I bought my house in 2022, a modest 2-story with a decent backyard where my golden retriever, Murphy, loved to run around. The property line was clearly marked by a white vinyl fence that separated my yard from the community green space behind it. That fence had been there since the house was built in 2018, installed by the original owners according to a survey I had seen during the closing process. But now, on this particular Tuesday in April 2025, my fence was gone. Not just gone, but replaced by a shiny new fence exactly 9 feet closer to my house. 9 feet of my backyard had simply vanished, swallowed up by fresh sod and a neat border of mulch that made it look like it had always been community property. I stood there in my pajama pants and t-shirt, coffee mug in hand, staring at this impossible situation. Murphy whined beside me, confused about why his territory had suddenly shrunk. The woman with the clipboard noticed me and marched over with the kind of purposeful stride that told me she had been waiting for this confrontation. "Good morning," she said, though her tone suggested it was anything but good. "I'm Patricia Hendricks, president of the Riverside Meadows Homeowners Association. I see you have noticed the correction we made to your property line." "Correction?" I felt my jaw tighten. "That's my fence you removed." "That's my property." Patricia smiled the way a teacher smiles at a child who has given a wrong answer. She was probably in her mid-50s, with hair dyed an aggressive blonde and pulled back so tight it looked painful. Her makeup was applied with military precision, and she wore sensible beige slacks with that purple cardigan, despite the warm spring morning. "Actually, Mr. Edwards, after reviewing the community plat maps, we discovered that the previous fence was installed incorrectly. The 9 feet you have been using belongs to the HOA common areas. We have simply corrected this error and restored the proper boundary." I blinked at her, trying to process what I was hearing. "I have a survey from when I bought the house. The fence line matches the property boundary exactly." She shook her head slowly, like I was being deliberately obtuse. "Your survey is outdated and incorrect. The HOA has consulted with our legal team and our own surveyor. The matter is settled. You are welcome to review the community bylaws, which clearly state that all property boundaries must conform to HOA specifications. You cannot just move someone's fence and claim their land," I said, my voice rising. "That's theft. That's illegal." Patricia's smile never wavered, but her eyes went cold. "Mr. Edwards, I suggest you review Section 12 of your HOA agreement, which you signed when you purchased your home. The association has the authority to maintain and correct all boundary designations within the community. This conversation is over. Have a pleasant day." She turned and walked away before I could respond, her sensible shoes clicking on the driveway. I stood there, stunned, watching her climb into a white Lexus SUV with a vanity plate that read HOA Forever. As she drove away, I noticed 2 men in work vests loading tools into a truck nearby. They were the ones who had moved my fence, clearly hired by the HOA. I pulled out my phone and called my buddy Jake, who worked as a real estate attorney in downtown Charlotte. "Jake, I need legal advice. The HOA just stole 9 feet of my backyard." "They what?" Jake sounded incredulous. "Start from the beginning." I explained the situation while walking around the new fence line, measuring it with my steps. 9 feet exactly. They had even removed the old fence posts, filled in the holes, and sodded over everything like it had never existed. Okay, first thing, Jake said, his tone shifting to professional mode. Do not sign anything they send you. Do not acknowledge in writing that this is the correct property line. Get your original survey out and take photos of everything. I need you to document this thoroughly. What can they actually do? Can the HOA really just claim someone's land? Absolutely not. North Carolina property law is very clear on this. Your property boundaries are established by your deed and survey, not by an HOA declaration. They might have authority over aesthetic issues, but they cannot relocate legal property lines. This is going to be a straightforward case, but it might get expensive. My stomach sank. How expensive? Could be a few thousand in legal fees, maybe more if it goes to court. But Ethan, you have to fight this. If you let them get away with it, they will do it to other homeowners, and you will lose 9 feet of property value permanently. After hanging up with Jake, I spent the next hour documenting everything. I took photos from every angle, measured the distance between the old and new fence lines using a tape measure, and dug through my home purchase documents until I found my original survey. The survey was crystal clear. My property line extended to exactly where the old fence had been. The new fence was 9 feet inside my legal boundary. I also started looking through the HOA documents I had signed at closing. Like most homeowners, I had skimmed them but never really read them carefully. They were dense, full of legal jargon about architectural standards, landscaping requirements, and community assessments. Section 12, which Patricia had referenced, did mention that the HOA had authority to maintain common areas and ensure compliance with community standards. But there was nothing about relocating property boundaries. By noon, I had a folder full of documentation and a growing sense of anger. This was not just about 9 feet of grass. It was about principle. It was about someone with a clipboard and an inflated sense of authority deciding they could just take what was mine. I decided to visit the HOA office, which was located in a small building near the community pool. The office was only open on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, and I wanted to escalate this immediately. The office was exactly what I expected: bland, beige, with motivational posters about community values and a reception desk, staffed by a bored-looking woman in her 20s who was scrolling through her phone. "I need to speak with Patricia Hendricks," I said. The receptionist did not look up. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but she just illegally moved my fence this morning, so I think we can skip the formalities." That got her attention. She looked up, eyes wide. "You are the fence guy, I guess so." She picked up her desk phone and spoke quietly into it, then gestured toward a hallway. "Third door on the right." Patricia's office was immaculate, with a large desk, leather chairs, and an entire wall of filing cabinets labeled with street names from the neighborhood. She looked up when I entered, her expression shifting from mild surprise to that same condescending smile. "Mr. Edwards, I did not expect you to come here. You stole my property. Where did you expect me to go?" She gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Please sit. Let us discuss this civilly." I remained standing. "There's nothing to discuss. You need to move that fence back to the legal property line immediately." Patricia folded her hands on her desk. "Mr. Edwards, I understand you are upset. Change is difficult. But the HOA has a responsibility to maintain accurate records and enforce community standards. The previous fence placement was incorrect. Our surveyor confirmed this. Show me the survey." "I beg your pardon. Show me the survey your supposed surveyor did." "I want to see the documentation that contradicts my legal survey from 2022. Patricia's smile tightened. "That information is part of HOA records and is not available to individual homeowners." "That's convenient. You claim you have proof but refuse to show it. She stood up, her chair rolling back slightly. Mr. Edwards, you are being hostile and unreasonable. The HOA board made this decision after careful consideration. If you wish to dispute it, you may file a formal grievance which will be reviewed at our next quarterly meeting in July. July. That's 3 months away. Yes, we have established procedures for a reason. I pulled out my phone and showed her the survey I had photographed earlier. This is my legal survey. It shows the property line exactly where my original fence was. You moved my fence 9 feet inside my legal boundary. That's theft, and I am going to pursue this legally. Patricia's expression finally cracked, showing a flash of genuine anger. If you choose to involve attorneys, Mr. Edwards, you should know that the HOA has significant legal resources. We also have the authority to place liens on properties for homeowners who violate community agreements or fail to pay special assessments. I strongly suggest you reconsider your approach. Is that a threat? It's a statement of fact. The HOA exists to protect property values and maintain community standards. Sometimes that requires difficult decisions. I suggest you accept this situation and move forward. I turned to leave, then stopped at the door. I will see you in court, Patricia. As I walked out, I heard her say something under her breath that sounded like entitled homeowners, but I kept walking. That evening, I met with Jake at his office downtown. He reviewed all my documentation and nodded approvingly. This is good. You have everything we need. The survey is clear, your deed is clear, and they have no documentation to support their claim. We can file an injunction to force them to restore the original fence line. How long will that take? If we move fast, maybe 2 weeks to get a hearing. But Ethan, you need to prepare for this to get ugly. HOA disputes can become very personal. Patricia will likely retaliate in other ways. What do you mean? Jake leaned back in his chair. HOAs have a lot of petty powers. They can fine you for ridiculous violations, send you constant notices about minor issues, make your life miserable with bureaucratic harassment. I have seen it happen. So what do? Document everything. Keep records of every interaction. Do not give them any legitimate reason to fine you. Make sure your grass is cut, your paint is perfect, your garbage cans are stored properly. Be a model homeowner except for this fence issue. Over the next few days, I followed Jake's advice religiously. I also started talking to my neighbors to gauge their awareness of the situation. What I discovered was disturbing. My next-door neighbor, Tom, was a retired accountant who had lived in Riverside Meadows since the development opened. The HOA has been getting more aggressive over the past year, he told me over his back fence. Patricia took over as president 18 months ago, and she has been on a power trip ever since. Last summer, they fined the Johnsons $200 because their mailbox was the wrong shade of black. Wrong shade of black. Can you believe that? Did the Johnsons fight it? Tom shook his head. They paid. Most people pay. It is easier than fighting. What about property boundaries? Has she done this to anyone else? Not that I know of, but she has been talking about expanding the common areas. I heard her at a board meeting saying the community needed more green space for property values. That got my attention. So she is just claiming private property for the HOA. Looks that way. You should talk to Denise across the street. She had a big fight with Patricia last year over some tree trimming issue. I found Denise Gardner working in her garden that afternoon. She was in her 40s, with paint-stained clothes that suggested she worked from home as an artist. Patricia Hendricks, Denise laughed bitterly. That woman is a menace. She tried to fine me $500 for cutting down a dead tree in my own backyard because I did not get HOA approval first. A dead tree, It was a safety hazard. What happened? I hired a lawyer and fought it. Took 6 months and cost me $2,000 in legal fees, but I won. The judge told the HOA they had overstepped their authority. Patricia was furious. She still glares at me every time she drives by. This was the pattern I kept hearing. Patricia had systematically been pushing boundaries, seeing how much power she could grab, how many rules she could enforce, how much control she could exert over the neighborhood. Most people paid the fines or complied with demands because fighting was expensive and exhausting. But taking 9 feet of someone's property was different. That was not a fine or a petty rule. That was theft. Jake filed the injunction on Monday, exactly 1 week after my fence was moved. The court date was set for 2 weeks later, which was fast for the legal system. The judge had apparently seen enough HOA abuse cases to take this seriously. 2 days after we filed, I received a certified letter from the HOA. Inside were 3 violation notices. The first claimed my grass was 1 inch above the allowed height of 3 inches. The fine was $100. The second claimed my house numbers were not properly visible from the street. The fine was $75. The third claimed I had left my garbage cans visible from the street for more than 12 hours after collection. The fine was $150. Total, $325 due within 30 days. I called Jake immediately. "This is retaliation," he said. "Photograph everything. When was your grass last cut? 3 days ago. It is nowhere near 4 inches. Measure it, document it. Same with everything else." This is exactly what I warned you about. They are trying to bury you in violations to pressure you into dropping the lawsuit. I spent the evening measuring my grass with a ruler, photographing my house numbers from various angles, and documenting my garbage can storage. Everything was in compliance with HOA rules. The violations were fabricated. Jake added the retaliatory fines to our court filing as evidence of harassment. The next week was tense. I kept expecting more violation notices, more harassment, but nothing came. Murphy and I adapted to the smaller yard, though I could tell he was confused about why his running space had shrunk. Every time I looked at that new fence, I felt my blood pressure rise. On Thursday, I came home from work to find a man in a suit standing in my driveway, taking photos of my house. "Can I help you?" I asked, approaching cautiously. He turned, professional smile in place. "Mr. Edwards, I'm Marcus Chen, the surveyor hired by the Riverside Meadows HOA. I am documenting the property boundaries for their records. The HOA already moved my fence." "What else is there to document?" Marcus looked uncomfortable. "I am just doing my job, sir. They hired me to conduct a survey and prepare a report." "Did they tell you they moved my fence 9 feet inside my legal property boundary without permission?" His discomfort increased. "I was told there was a dispute about the boundary location." I pulled out my phone and showed him my survey. "This is my legal survey from 2022. Where does your survey put the property line?" Marcus studied the image, his expression shifting. "May I ask, do you have the original paper copy?" "Inside." "Why?" "Because your survey shows the property line exactly where you say it is. If the HOA commissioned me to produce a different result, that would be surveyor fraud. I could lose my license." We went inside and I showed him the full survey document. Marcus spent 20 minutes reviewing it, taking notes, measuring details. Finally, he sat back and sighed. "Mr. Edwards, your survey is legitimate and accurate. I cannot produce a survey that contradicts this. It would be professionally unethical and illegal." "What will you tell the HOA?" "The truth. That your original property line is correct and the new fence is inside your legal boundary." He paused. "Can I ask, do you have a lawyer?" "Yes. We have a court date next week. Good, because between you and me, I have worked with HOAs before and I have seen this kind of power play. They are betting you will not fight back. Most people do not. He handed me his business card. If your lawyer wants me to testify, I will. What they are doing is wrong. That conversation was the first moment I felt like I might actually win this. The court hearing was scheduled for the following Wednesday at 10 in the morning. Jake told me to dress professionally but not too formally, to be respectful but firm, and to let him do most of the talking. The Mecklenburg County Courthouse in downtown Charlotte was an imposing building, all glass and stone and the weight of authority. I met Jake in the lobby and we went through security together. My stomach was churning with nervous energy. "Relax," Jake said. "We have all the evidence. This should be straightforward." The courtroom was smaller than I expected, with just a few rows of seats and the judge's bench at the front. Patricia was already there with her attorney, a sharp-looking man in an expensive suit who exuded confidence. Patricia wore a navy blue dress suit and had her hair in a perfect bun. She looked like she was ready for a corporate board meeting, not a court hearing. Judge Rachel Morrison entered, and we all stood. She was probably in her early 60s, with gray hair and the kind of stern expression that suggested she had zero patience for nonsense. "This is a hearing regarding Edwards versus Riverside Meadows Homeowners Association," she said, settling into her seat. "Mr. Patterson, you are representing the plaintiff," Jake stood. "Yes, Your Honor, Jake Patterson for Mr. Ethan Edwards." "And for the defendant," Patricia's attorney rose. "Richard Cumberland for the Riverside Meadows HOA, Your Honor." Judge Morrison nodded. "Mr. Patterson, please present your case." Jake laid out the situation clearly and concisely. He presented my original survey, photos of the moved fence, and documentation showing the HOA had relocated the fence 9 feet inside my legal property boundary without permission or legitimate cause. "Your Honor, this is a clear case of property theft," Jake concluded. "The HOA has no legal authority to relocate property boundaries, and they have provided no documentation to support their claim that the original fence was incorrectly placed. We are asking the court to order the HOA to restore the fence to its original, legally surveyed location and to pay damages for the violation of my client's property rights." Judge Morrison turned to Richard Cumberland. "Mr. Cumberland, your response." Cumberland stood smoothly. "Your Honor, the Riverside Meadows HOA has a responsibility to maintain accurate records and ensure community standards. After reviewing historical plat maps, the board determined that the previous fence placement encroached on community common areas. The HOA has the authority under the community covenants to correct such encroachments. You have documentation supporting your claim that the original fence was incorrectly placed?" Judge Morrison asked. "We have the community plat maps, Your Honor. May I see them?" Cumberland approached the bench with a folder. Judge Morrison reviewed the contents, her expression unchanging. After a long moment, she looked up. "Mr. Cumberland, these plat maps show the overall community layout, but they do not include precise boundary measurements for individual properties. Do you have a survey that contradicts Mr. Edwards' survey?" Cumberland hesitated, just for a second. "We commissioned a survey, Your Honor, but the surveyor has not yet completed his report." "So you moved Mr. Edwards' fence without having a survey that supported your position?" The board believed, based on the plat maps and historical records, that the correction was appropriate. Judge Morrison set the folder down. "Mr. Cumberland, belief is not the same as evidence. Mr. Edwards has presented a clear legal survey establishing his property boundaries. The HOA moved his fence 9 feet inside that boundary without permission and without supporting documentation. This is a violation of North Carolina property law." Patricia leaned over and whispered something urgently to Cumberland. He nodded and stood again. "Your Honor, if I may, the HOA would like to propose a compromise. We will move the fence back 6 feet, splitting the difference." I felt Jake tense beside me. Judge Morrison's expression darkened. "Mr. Cumberland, this is not a negotiation. Property boundaries are established by legal surveys and deeds, not by compromise. The law is clear on this matter." She turned to Jake. "Mr. Patterson, does your client have any additional evidence?" Jake stood. "Yes, Your Honor. We have a statement from Marcus Chen, a licensed surveyor who was hired by the HOA after this dispute began. Mr. Chen confirmed that Mr. Edwards' survey is accurate and that the new fence is inside the legal property boundary. He is available to testify if needed." Judge Morrison nodded. "That will not be necessary. I have reviewed the evidence and my ruling is as follows." She looked directly at Patricia. "The Riverside Meadows HOA will restore Mr. Edwards' fence to its original location, matching the property boundary established in his legal survey within 30 days. The HOA will pay all costs associated with this restoration. Additionally, the HOA will pay Mr. Edwards $5,000 in damages for the violation of his property rights and legal fees." Patricia's face went red. "Your Honor, that is my ruling, Miss Hendricks. Furthermore, I am ordering the HOA to provide Mr. Edwards with written confirmation that his property boundaries are as stated in his survey, and that the association will not contest this matter further. Any additional harassment or retaliation against Mr. Edwards will result in contempt charges and additional penalties. Do you understand?" Cumberland put a hand on Patricia's arm before she could respond. "Yes, Your Honor, we understand." "Good. This hearing is concluded." As we filed out of the courtroom, I felt like I could finally breathe. Jake was grinning. That went better than expected. Judge Morrison clearly saw through their nonsense. $5,000, I said. I was not expecting that. Neither were they. Morrison has dealt with HOA abuse before. She does not tolerate it. Behind us, I could hear Patricia arguing with Cumberland in harsh whispers. I did not turn around, but I could feel her anger like heat on my back. The next few days were quiet. I expected some kind of retaliation, but Patricia seemed to have gotten the message that Judge Morrison was watching. The fabricated violation notices stopped. No one from the HOA contacted me. On Tuesday morning, exactly 1 week after the court hearing, a crew showed up at my house. They removed the new fence and began digging post holes for the restored fence at the original property line. Murphy watched with interest from the window, his tail wagging as his yard expanded back to its proper size. Patricia did not supervise the work personally. Instead, she sent the board receptionist from the HOA office, who stood around looking at her phone while the crew worked. By late afternoon, my fence was back where it belonged, and the 9 feet of stolen property was mine again. That evening, I got a call from Tom, my neighbor. "Ethan, you are a legend in the neighborhood. Everyone is talking about how you beat the HOA in court. I just wanted my property back." "Yeah, but you did what most people are too scared to do. Patricia has been running roughshod over everyone for months, and you stood up to her." People are inspired. Inspired to do what? To fight back. Mrs. Chen on Oakwood Drive just filed a complaint about a fine she got for her holiday decorations. The Robinsons are challenging their special assessment. People are realizing Patricia is not as powerful as she pretends to be. That made me smile. Maybe some good would come from this mess after all. The following week, I received a check from the HOA for $5,000 and a stiff, formal letter confirming my property boundaries. The letter was signed by Richard Cumberland. not Patricia. I wondered if the board had told her to step back from any communication with me. I deposited the check and used part of it to take my girlfriend, Veronica Hayes, out for a nice dinner. Veronica was a teacher at a local elementary school, patient and kind, and she had been incredibly supportive throughout the fence drama. "So it is really over?" she asked over pasta at our favorite Italian place. "I think so, unless Patricia wants to end up in front of Judge Morrison again." "I still cannot believe they just moved your fence and thought they would get away with it." "They probably have gotten away with worse. I was just stubborn enough to fight." Veronica reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Not stubborn, principled. There is a difference." But it was not quite over. 2 weeks later, I received a notice that there would be a special HOA board meeting to discuss community concerns and leadership matters. All homeowners were invited to attend. Tom called me that evening. "Are you going to the meeting?" "Should I?" "Absolutely." Word is that several homeowners are planning to call for Patricia's removal as president. This is your fence case, Ethan. You started something. The meeting was held on a Thursday evening at the community center, a neutral space that could hold about 100 people. I arrived with Veronica, and we found seats in the middle of the room. The place was packed, far more than usual for HOA meetings, according to Tom. Patricia sat at a table at the front with 4 other board members. She looked composed, but I could see tension in her shoulders, in the way she gripped her pen. The meeting started with standard business, approving minutes from the previous meeting and discussing the budget for pool maintenance. Then they opened the floor for community concerns. A woman I did not recognize stood up first. "I want to address the recent legal action against the HOA regarding property boundaries. Can the board explain how this situation occurred and what measures are being taken to prevent similar incidents?" Patricia's jaw tightened. "The board acted on information available at the time. The court disagreed with our interpretation, and we have complied with the ruling. The matter is resolved. But the HOA lost $5,000 of community funds because of this action," the woman pressed. "That is money that comes from our dues. Shouldn't there be accountability?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Another homeowner stood, a man in his 30s. "I received 3 violation notices in 1 week immediately after Mr. Edwards filed his lawsuit. All 3 were bogus." "Is the board using violations as retaliation?" Patricia's face flushed. "The HOA enforces community standards equally for all residents." "That is not true." Denise Gardner stood up from the back. "I have been tracking violation notices for the past 6 months. There has been a 300% increase in citations since Patricia became president. Most of them are trivial or fabricated. This is not about maintaining standards. It is about control." The room erupted in voices, everyone talking at once. One of the other board members, an older man named Gerald, held up his hands for quiet. "Please, everyone, let us maintain order. These are serious allegations. Patricia, perhaps the board should discuss this in executive session." "There is nothing to discuss," Patricia snapped. "I have served this community faithfully and by the book. If homeowners are unhappy with enforcement of rules they agreed to, that is not my problem." Tom stood up. "Actually, it is your problem, Patricia. You are supposed to serve the community, not rule it like a dictator." "I move that we hold a vote of no confidence in the current HOA president." "You cannot do that," Patricia said. "That is not proper procedure." Gerald was flipping through a binder. "Actually, according to our bylaws, any homeowner can motion for a leadership vote if 25% of attending members agree to hear it. We have at least that many people here." Hands shot up around the room. Someone counted quickly, and announced that over 40% of attendees supported hearing the motion. Patricia looked like she had been slapped. "This is ridiculous. You are all being manipulated by a disgruntled homeowner who would not accept legitimate community decisions." Legitimate. I found myself standing without quite meaning to. "You stole 9 feet of my property and tried to intimidate me into accepting it. A judge ruled against you. That is not legitimate, Patricia. That is illegal." The room exploded in applause. Patricia stared at me with pure hatred, and for a moment, I thought she might actually lunge across the room at me. Gerald called for order again. "We need to table this discussion and schedule a proper vote. I am calling an emergency board meeting for next week to address these issues formally." The meeting dissolved into chaos after that, with people clustering in groups, talking urgently. Veronica and I slipped out quietly. As we walked to the car, I felt a strange mix of triumph and exhaustion. "That was intense," Veronica said. "Yeah, I just wanted my fence back." "I did not mean to start a revolution," she laughed. "Sometimes standing up for yourself inspires others to do the same." The emergency board meeting the following week was closed to regular homeowners, but Tom, who had connections on the board, kept me updated. Patricia had resigned as president before the vote could happen, though she remained on the board as a regular member. Gerald took over as interim president and immediately announced a comprehensive review of all violation notices issued in the past year. That review turned up some disturbing patterns. Patricia had been systematically targeting homeowners who questioned her authority or who had filed complaints. She had also been inflating violation fines beyond what the bylaws allowed and pocketing the difference. Over 18 months, she had embezzled nearly $15,000 from the HOA. Tom called me when the news broke. "Ethan, it is worse than we thought. Patricia was not just power-hungry. She was stealing." "Are they going to report it to the police?" "The board is meeting with lawyers now." Apparently, there is enough evidence to press charges. 2 weeks later, Patricia Hendricks was arrested for embezzlement and fraud. The local news covered it briefly, a short segment about HOA corruption that made Riverside Meadows look terrible. Property values took a small hit, but Gerald worked hard to restore community trust, implementing new oversight procedures and transparency measures. I ran into Patricia once more before her court date. I was getting gas at a station near the neighborhood when I saw her white Lexus at another pump. She was pumping gas, her movements stiff and mechanical. Her hair was not as perfect as usual, and she looked 10 years older. Our eyes met across the pumps. For a moment, I thought about saying something, but what was there to say? She had brought this on herself through arrogance and greed. She looked away first, finishing her gas and driving off without a word. Patricia's trial happened that fall. She pleaded guilty to embezzlement and was sentenced to 18 months in prison and ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA. The judge was not sympathetic to her claims that she had been serving the community. Riverside Meadows slowly recovered from the scandal. Gerald was elected as permanent president, and the board implemented reforms to prevent any single person from having too much unchecked authority. Violation notices decreased dramatically and became reasonable enforcement of actual issues rather than petty harassment. My life returned to normal. Murphy enjoyed his full-sized yard again, running circles that would not have been possible in the smaller space Patricia had tried to force on us. Veronica and I got engaged that winter, and we started planning a small backyard wedding for the following spring. One Saturday morning in December, I was raking leaves near the fence line when Tom came over with a 6-pack of beer. "Thought you might want to celebrate," he said. "Celebrate what?" "The fact that you basically saved the neighborhood from a tyrant. Also, it is Saturday, and I am retired, so I do not need an excuse to drink beer. We sat on my back deck, looking out at the yard. The fence stood exactly where it should, marking my property line clearly and legally. "Do you ever regret fighting it?" Tom asked. All the stress, the legal fees, the drama, I thought about it. No, it was not really about the fence, you know. It was about someone thinking they could take what was mine just because they had a title and a clipboard. If I had let her get away with it, she would have kept pushing until someone else pushed back. I guess I was just the first one stubborn enough to say no. Or principled enough, Tom said, echoing Veronica's words from months earlier. As winter turned to spring, I noticed subtle changes in the neighborhood. People were friendlier, more willing to chat over fences and share concerns. The HOA became more responsive and less dictatorial. Board meetings were productive rather than contentious. Veronica and I got married in May in my backyard, with the fence clearly visible in the background of our photos. It had become a symbol of sorts, a reminder that standing up for what was right mattered, even when it was difficult. During the reception, Gerald gave a toast that referenced the famous fence incident and thanked me for having the courage to challenge an unjust situation. People laughed and applauded, and I felt Veronica squeeze my hand under the table. That summer, I got a call from Marcus Chen, the surveyor who had helped confirm my property boundaries. "Mr. Edwards, I wanted to let you know that your case has become something of a reference point in property law circles. I have been asked to speak at a conference about surveyor ethics, and I am using your situation as an example of why accurate documentation matters. I am famous in surveyor circles," I joked. "You would be surprised how often HOAs try to pressure surveyors into producing favorable results. Your willingness to fight back has made some of us more confident in refusing those requests." It was strange to think that my fence dispute had ripples beyond Riverside Meadows, but I supposed that was how change happened. One person standing firm and others finding the courage to do the same. Years passed. Murphy got older and slower, eventually passing away peacefully at age 12. Veronica and I adopted a rescue dog named Bailey who loved the yard just as much as Murphy had. We had 2 kids, Emma and Oliver, who played in that backyard, running across every inch of property that I had fought to keep. The fence eventually needed replacing due to age and weather. When the workers came to install the new one, I made sure to be present for every measurement, confirming the property line matched my survey exactly. Veronica teased me about being paranoid, but I did not care. That fence represented something important, the principle that authority had to be earned and justified, not simply assumed. Riverside Meadows continued to thrive under reasonable HOA leadership. Gerald served as president for 5 years, before retiring and passing the role to a younger homeowner, who maintained the reforms he had implemented. The neighborhood became known in Charlotte as one of the better-run communities, a place where the HOA actually served residents rather than ruling over them. I occasionally saw articles about HOA abuses in other neighborhoods, horror stories about liens and foreclosures and petty tyrannies. Each time, I felt grateful that I had fought back when it mattered, that I had not accepted Patricia's theft simply because fighting seemed too difficult. One fall afternoon, I was in the backyard with Oliver, who was 6 and obsessed with building forts. We were gathering sticks near the fence line when he asked me a question. "Daddy, why is this fence so important?" I thought about how to explain it to a 6-year-old. "Because it marks what is ours. And sometimes, you have to fight to protect what is yours even when it is hard." Did you have to fight? I did. A long time ago, someone tried to take part of our yard, but I said no and I proved it was ours and we got to keep it. Oliver nodded seriously, processing this. Good, I like our yard. Me too, buddy, me too. As the sun set that evening, I stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the fence line. It was just a white vinyl fence, nothing special or remarkable. But it represented a moment when I had refused to back down, when I had stood up for principle over convenience, when I had said no to someone who was used to everyone saying yes. That fence was a boundary, yes, but it was also a symbol. A reminder that ordinary people could stand against abuses of power, that the law protected property rights for a reason, and that fighting for what was right mattered, even when the stakes seemed small. 9 feet of property. In the grand scheme of things, it was not much. But it was mine, legally and rightfully mine, and no clipboard-wielding HOA president had the authority to take it away. That principle was worth fighting for, worth the legal fees and stress and confrontation. Veronica came up behind me and wrapped her arms around my waist. "What are you thinking about? The fence," she laughed. "Still, Ethan, that was years ago." "I know. But sometimes I think about what would have happened if I had not fought. Patricia would have gotten away with it, would have kept abusing her power, kept stealing and intimidating. The neighborhood would have suffered. But you did fight and things changed. You can let it go now." She was right, of course. The battle was long over, won decisively. Patricia was out of prison now but had moved away, her reputation destroyed. The HOA was running smoothly under honest leadership. My property line was secure and documented, but I did not regret dwelling on it occasionally. That fence dispute had taught me something important about myself, about courage and principle. It had shown me that standing up to authority was possible, that legal systems could work when you had truth on your side, that one person refusing to back down could inspire others to do the same. The fence stood straight and true in the fading light, marking the boundary of my property, protecting my family's space. It was exactly where it belonged, where it had always legally belonged, where it would remain. And that, ultimately, was all that mattered. The fight had been worth it. The principle had been vindicated and justice had been served. Not the dramatic, Hollywood kind of justice, but the quiet, steady justice of property law upheld, of theft corrected, of abuse checked. Years later, when Emma was in high school studying civics, she asked me about the fence story for a project on property rights. I walked her through the whole thing, showing her the old documents, the photos I had taken, even the court ruling. "So you really went to court over 9 feet?" she asked, somewhat incredulously. "It was never really about the 9 feet, I explained. It was about the principle, about someone with power thinking they could take what was not theirs. If I had let it go, what message would that have sent? That authority figures can do whatever they want if they are intimidating enough." Emma nodded slowly. "So you fought because it was the right thing to do, not because of the actual property." "Well, I wanted my property back too," I admitted with a smile. "But yes, the principle mattered more than the land itself." She used the story in her project, and apparently it resonated with her teacher and classmates. Her teacher even reached out to me, asking if I would be willing to speak to the class about civic engagement and standing up for rights. I agreed, and spent an hour answering questions from curious teenagers about HOAs, property law, and why adults sometimes had to fight other adults over seemingly small things. One student asked the question that got to the heart of it all. Was it scary to fight them? Yes, I answered honestly. Patricia was intimidating, and the HOA had lawyers and money and authority. I was just one homeowner with a survey and a principal, but being scared is not a reason not to do what is right. Sometimes the right thing is scary and you do it anyway. The class applauded when I finished, and I left feeling like maybe the fence dispute had served a purpose beyond just recovering my 9 feet of property. It had become a teaching moment, a real-world example of how ordinary people navigate systems of power and authority. That evening I walked the fence line one more time, Bailey trotting beside me, sniffing at interesting smells. The fence was aging well, still straight and sturdy. Beyond it, the community green space stretched out, well-maintained and available for all residents to enjoy. The boundary was clear and respected. I thought about Patricia occasionally, wondering what had become of her after prison and disgrace. Had she learned anything from the experience? Did she regret her actions, or did she still believe she had been in the right, punished for trying to maintain community standards? I would never know. Our paths would never cross again, and that was fine with me. She was part of my past, an antagonist in a story that had concluded years ago. The fence remained, but Patricia was gone, her authority dissolved, her schemes exposed. Riverside Meadows thrived without her. Property values recovered and grew. New families moved in, attracted by the well-run HOA and friendly community atmosphere. The neighborhood became what it should have been all along, a place where people lived peacefully, where rules were reasonable and fairly enforced, where residents were treated as stakeholders rather than subjects. And through it all, my fence stood exactly where it belonged, 9 feet farther from my house than Patricia had tried to force it, marking the legal boundary of my property and standing as a quiet monument to the principle that might does not make right, that authority must be justified, and that ordinary people can push back against injustice when they find the courage to do so. As I stood there in the gathering dusk, Bailey sitting patiently beside me, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Not pride exactly, though there was some of that. More a feeling of having done what needed to be done, of having stood firm when it mattered, of having left the neighborhood a little better than I found it. The fence was just a fence, white vinyl posts and rails marking a property line. But it was also a story, a lesson, a reminder. And every time I looked at it, I remembered that moment when I had chosen to fight rather than submit, when I had said no to theft disguised as authority, when I had proven that one determined homeowner with truth on his side could beat an entire HOA board. That was a lesson worth remembering and a story worth telling. 9 feet of property, a clipboard-wielding tyrant, and a fight that changed more than just a fence line. It changed a community, inspired reforms, and taught me something essential about courage and principle. The sun finally set completely, and I called Bailey inside. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and joys, its own moments of decision and consequence. But tonight, I could rest easy, knowing my fence stood where it should, my property was secure, and justice had been served. And really, what more could anyone ask for? The fight was over, the victory secured, the lesson learned. The fence would stand for years to come, a silent witness to a small but significant battle, a boundary marker that meant more than just property lines. It meant that right had triumphed over might, that truth had overcome deception, and that one person willing to stand firm could make all the difference. That was the real story of the fence, and that was why I would never regret fighting for those 9 feet of grass and soil. They were mine, rightfully and legally mine, and no one had the authority to take them away. That principle, more than anything else, was worth defending. And defend it I had, with documents and determination, and the unwavering belief that justice would prevail. Standing in my kitchen, looking out at the fence in the darkness, I smiled. It was just a fence, but it was my fence on my property, exactly where it belonged. And that made all the difference in the world.